I wanted to show my favorite exact width dado jig. Now I have several versions of these. Some of them run off of a guide bushing. Some of them use a bearing guided bit. They're all of course router based jigs, but this one runs off of a bearing guided bit and it's just my favorite. I have several of these hanging on the wall. Some are commercially made and they're different versions, but this is the one I'm always reaching to when I'm doing case goods like building cabinets or this dresser I'm working on today. So I just wanted to take a minute and show how this jig works and how easy it is to get perfectly fitting dados regardless of whether you're using undersized plywood or just hardwood. Now of course the main issue with using a standard 3/4 inch router bit and edge guide, you'll get these sloppy fitting joints with undersized plywood. So it really is not a good solution, but you say, well, what about those specialty router bits that are specifically designed to cut at, for instance, 23-30 seconds for undersized plywood? And that can be an option so long as your plywood is exactly that dimension. But the problem is there's really no adjustability for plywood that's slightly a different thickness. Now of course you could take your project over to the table saw and just use a dado blade. That does give you nice adjustability and really clean cuts in my experience, especially if you have a good dado set. But the problem is if you're working with an oversized side panel like a dresser or a cabinet, sometimes that's just not manageable. Or there's another issue I've come into where you're trying to cut stop grooves just like this. On the side of this dresser, the grooves stop at the front. And that's almost impossible to line up and cut consistently spaced dados at the table saw. So it is worthwhile to look for a better solution using a router. So that's why I came up with this exact width dado jig. It just clamps to your workpiece with a couple of these little F clamps or whatever you got laying around. But the idea is it gives you some adjustability. So you loosen these large clamps here and it lets the jig slide in and out. And what you do is you actually use one of your pieces of shelf stock that you're going to use for your project, the exact plywood that you're going to use, put it in here, pinch it against that shelf, and then tighten up the knobs, and that'll make an exact fitting dado for your plywood. So this is the plywood I used to set the jig. Let's drop that in there and check the fit. Oh yeah, nice fit, stands on its own. So just a tiny bit of room for glue. I think that's going to be a perfect fit. Especially when you're trying to wrangle multiple shelves, you need the fit to be just right on each one so the whole case will go together. Still have to cut this to finish with and add a little hardwood edging on the front, but good clean fit on this side with no gaps. And same story on this side. Looks great. And here's the bit you'll need. It's a very short length cutter, about a 1/2 inch long, and that's the one I prefer just because I'm typically cutting a very shallow dado for a cabinet, like a 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch deep. It's guided by a bearing, and of course that bearing needs to exactly match the diameter of your cutter. There's probably several router bits like this that would do the job. This one's made by Whiteside, and I'll drop a link down in the description for you. Okay, we'll size up our plywood shelf for this and then we'll get a good look at the overall construction of this jig. Just put your shelf in and then you'll be able to close the jig up around it. Tighten up the knobs one at a time and you're good. And these little routed handles help quite a bit to get the pressure on as you tighten up those knobs. Pretty easy to do. And I think the thing I like best about this is how tight you clamp that onto your plywood is exactly how that'll fit in your finished project. So you can just kind of dial it in the way you prefer. I put stop blocks on either end because I like to do a lot of stop dados and you never know which side those are going to appear on. So I just added them on both sides. Nice rockler knobs there are kind of easy to grip, and the stop block itself just has a slotted groove in it. And then it's got a little runner, so it kind of follows along in that dado track. And the idea is instead of having a T-track or a long groove in the jig itself, I just added some threaded inserts. So the slot is long enough that it allows me to position it anywhere along the common spots I might need to stop a dado. Add the knob and you're good to go. So pretty simple on the stop blocks. On this side, it just needed one threaded insert, but we'll pull that off so we can have a better look at the jig. So the two main parts of the jig are just made from 3/4 inch MDF, and the key thing for me is that they're wide enough to get those clamps on. And then on the other side, you just have a fixed end, so this is locked at 90 degrees to this piece, and then a slotted way on the other side that has that knob on the other side, so that'll let you adjust the width for the perfect size dado. And on the other end, it's just the same setup, a little slot on one side with a T-bolt, and that attaches to your knob on the other side. Flip it over, and it's just a simple, real basic knob there to secure things. As far as this curved shape, that's pretty well optional, but it works well for me because it gives you a nice spot here to add an extra clamp if the size of the project allows it. Well, that sounds great, but are there any negatives with using this style of jig as opposed to one that runs with a guide bushing? I wouldn't really call it a negative, but there is one gotcha that you have to be aware of, and it has to do with how you use your router. Because we're using a bearing guided bit here, that'll follow the MDF jig, and that's really your only reference. Now because of that, you want to leave the bit plunged to full depth until the motor completely spins down. If you fail to do that, you could damage your workpiece or put a big divot in your jig. To get around that issue, you could just use a fixed base router, and that works so long as it's a shallow pass and you do have access to get the bit started. I typically like to cut my dados in 2 passes though, so I like to use a plunge router. Just remember to keep it plunged to full depth until the router spins down. Usually just a square reference line with some X to indicate what side of the line you want the dado on is all you need, and we'll make a test cut. Now this jig has already been set to our white oak plywood. It's really the shelf stock that needs to go in here, not the case side. And here's where you have lots of extra room to add those F clamps to lock the jig onto your workpiece. Like it. Okay, so here I'm going to cut this dado in 2 depths. First just about 1/8 of an inch, and then at 3/8 of an inch. So I'll plunge down to that first depth setting, move in a clockwise direction inside the opening of the jig, lower my depth, and repeat. Okay, the router is fully stopped, so I can raise it up. We're done with that first setting. I'll twist this around for a full depth cut, and we'll start in that lowered position. And I like that the router base just contacts that stop block, so if you're making a series of identical dados, they'll all come out just the same. A little bit of fuzz on the entrance there, but where it shows, right on the face of the veneer, nice and clean. But most important of all, that'll drop in with a nice friction fit. Perfect. So these are the side panels for a dresser that I'm building my son, and I was just really pleased on this that the dados all came out nice and consistent. So if you take the time to build this simple jig with a little bit of 3/4 inch MDF and some scraps that maybe you already have laying around the shop, I bet it'll become your new favorite way to cut those exact width dados, just like it has in my shop. But hey, I'll throw a couple links down in the description box. One will be to an article I wrote for Popular Woodworking magazine on how to build this jig. And there's a second version of it as well that uses a guide bushing. But, you know, after years of use, this one that runs on a bearing guided bit really has become my favorite. So for what it's worth, that's the one I like. But I'll also link to the short length bit that I use so you can have everything you need to build one of these yourself. Hit me with a quick thumbs up if you like the topic, and if you're not already, consider becoming a subscriber to The Thoughtful Woodworker. Oh, that is what I'm talking about. That is so nice. If they could just all fit like that, we'd be happy people. Nice. Until next time, you handy little jig. There, it's starting to look like a piece of furniture with a nice flat top. Looks good. Solid oak drawer boxes, soft close slides. This kid doesn't know what he's getting.